Thank you, Natalie. So I get to blush twice over that lengthy, lengthy bio. I occasionally suffer from delusions of grandeur, and I've sort of been a little bit punished for them right now because I agreed to do two presentations, not knowing what life had in store, otherwise known as Hurricane Matthew, which threatened Jamaica as a Category 4, and thankfully veered off at the very last moment, or very slowly, actually. So my life was rather disrupted over the last week, and what should have been my weekend of writing this paper never quite happened. So I came here woefully unprepared for this, and with a title that now stares at me in a way that makes me shiver a little bit. But basically what I'm going to present is my first thoughts on this matter, rather than a fully developed, academically sound paper. So I hope you'll bear with me, and that nonetheless you'll find some use in the thoughts that I will present. And it is ironic that I follow just after Lee, because in the sense what I will talk about also is related to this concept of bundled events and how we can leverage that more in the Caribbean to develop what we're doing here. I recently had the opportunity to travel to Edinburgh, Scotland, to participate in the Momentum program as a visual arts delegate, along with 10 other art museum directors and curators from Japan, France, Colombia, New Zealand, Trinidad and Tobago, and Martinique. Momentum is a program associated with Edinburgh festivals that aims to, and I quote from their website, to encourage partnerships, investment, and international collaboration. Momentum shares the wider Scottish cultural offerings with delegates and cultivates collaborative opportunities for Edinburgh's festivals, Scottish artists, and Scottish work internationally. End of quote. Edinburgh is rightly hailed as the world's leading festival city, with 12 major citywide festivals per calendar year, which attract more than 4 million visitors combined, or to put it in context, more than the entire population of Jamaica, which is just below 3 million. The Momentum Visual Arts program focused on the Edinburgh Art Festival, the city's visual art festival specifically, which was in its preview and opening week at the time of my visit. The Edinburgh Art Festival is spearheaded by the Edinburgh Festival Office, a branch of the city government, and has dedicated staff. But it is fundamentally a networked event, which involves significant collaborations with other persons and entities. The festival program consists of site-specific art commissions, and you're actually going to see one. I'll talk about it in a second. Other festival-organized exhibitions and events, and a diverse range of affiliated exhibitions and related events at local museums, such as the National Gallery of Scotland and the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. They actually have two. Public art galleries, various art NGOs, and pop-up locations. We had the opportunity to meet with directors and curators at these organizations and to discuss exhibitions, programs, operations, and importantly, funding with them. We also met with various Scottish artists and directors and curators of art institutions elsewhere in Scotland, and the program included a day trip to Glasgow. In all, we had an excellent opportunity to observe the rather robust Scottish art ecology in action. And I'm not at all suggesting that the Scottish art world is unproblematic and does not have biases and omissions and so on. But the machinery that we saw in action there was truly impressive. I mean, it really is a very well-oiled machine, and one that we can definitely learn from. One recurrent point in our conversations during Momentum was the funding support received from Creative Scotland, which is the national development agency for the arts, screen and creative industries, and the counterpart of the Arts Council in England. I was particularly fascinated by the collaborative nature of the Edinburgh Art Festival and the extensive public-private collaborations and networking involved, which were, with only a few exceptions, limited to the non-profit sector. As the international selection of the artists in the festival and the Momentum program itself illustrated, a locally rooted art festival does not have to be insular or myopic, but can be outward-looking and inclusive. The experience made me think about the art ecologies of the Caribbean, a subject that has been on my mind recently, particularly with regards to the place and role of the National Gallery of Jamaica in that context. It also made me think how the Edinburgh Art Festival collaborative model could be adapted to develop art events in the Caribbean, such as the Jamaica Biennial, which is now exclusively organized by the National Gallery of Jamaica, even though it involves multiple locations and several local and regional collaborations. Before I move on, I just want to, these were two examples of the special commissions that were associated with the Edinburgh Art Festival. And I just want to single out this one by Graham Fagan, because it does in fact have a very interesting Caribbean angle to it. It is based on the poem The Slave's Lament by the Scottish poet Burns. And what Graham Fagan has been doing in his recent work is to really explore the historical connections between Scotland and the Caribbean, particularly with regards to the slave trade and the plantation economy. Burns actually was supposed to go to Jamaica on 2 occasions to work on a plantation, and for various reasons never actually went. So this neon work, which is in a traffic overpass, actually reflects on those 2 aborted journeys and reflects on the largely uncharted connections between Scotland and the Caribbean. All right, so to return to the Jamaica Biennial now, I just want to show you a few slides of the first biennial that was presented under that name in 2014. And I'm starting with an example of the work of Blue Curry, which in itself illustrates the sort of collaborations that are really necessary to make an event like that work. Because the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas was kind enough to provide Blue Curry with funding support for the production of his work. So it in effect involved a collaboration with another national gallery in the Caribbean. This was an outdoor work. What Blue Curry essentially did was to sort of bring the most stereotypical image of the Caribbean, you know, the sea and the blue sky, in dialogue with the urban environment of Kingston by plastering these large paper posters, basically, onto various urban sites, such as this derelict building that you see here right now. Other examples, Richard Mark Rawlins from Trinidad. So what we did for that biennial was also internationalize what had previously been a national biennial. Local artist, Leisho Johnson, a very popular work. Ebony Patterson, so this is one of the examples of the works also at other locations. This was at Devon House, which is the original home of the National Gallery. And what we did there was to use works that really intervened into the space and into the history of Devon House. And this one really talks about, violence, the violence against children, particularly in Jamaican society. Other examples of the interventions at Devon House. And then finally, an exhibition that was also part of the biennial that we showed at National Gallery West in Montego Bay, which featured the work of Renee Cox, who is a Jamaican-born artist and actually visits Jamaica quite regularly. So to return to my considerations about the Edinburgh Art Festival and what it can do for us, I must say that one of my regular frustrations as the head of the National Gallery of Jamaica, or the National Gallery as I shall call it from here on, is that we are expected to be everything to everybody in the absence of significant corporate and private non-profit initiatives in the arts and an all but defunct commercial gallery and art dealing scene. This has not been an entirely bad thing, in that it has allowed the National Gallery to be more proactively involved in the artistic development in the Jamaican context, for instance, through our young artist exhibitions. And you see here, as I speak, some examples of what we have shown in that regard. And this allows us to go beyond what public galleries and museums usually do. This everything to everybody expectation has, however, also resulted in downright problematic and unrealistic expectations. As a public art museum, we can, for instance, not be expected to be involved, to involve ourselves, rather, in the sale and commercial promotion of art, or to serve as a career management agency for individual artists. Yet this is an expectation we are confronted with on an almost daily basis, coming from artists and members of the public alike. I know that Natalie and Amanda face similar queries on a regular basis. It is of note, since this is, after all, the MAC conference, that such queries illustrate that the status and role of a national gallery as a public art museum is poorly understood in the Caribbean context, even though there are 5 such institutions in the Anglophone Caribbean, and at least one more is being planned. In the Jamaican context, it also means that there is an excessive dependence on the National Gallery on the part of the artistic community, even though the National Gallery is itself under-resourced and often beleaguered with heavy workloads and the demands and politics of the Jamaican art world. Sadly, this means that a lot of potential for productive public-private collaborative networks is left underdeveloped and untapped, and compared to Scotland, the art ecology of Jamaica is very lopsided, with insufficient private initiative and even more so, insufficient public-private synergies and collaborations. If we want to develop art events such as the Jamaica Biennial to their fullest potential, or establish a more ambitious regional biennial, which is an idea I'm considering at the present time, this will certainly have to change. And there will have to be more shared responsibility for the development of these events. In fact, I have reached a point where I wonder whether the National Gallery should be the organizing body for this biennial at all, whether there should not be a special foundation or a special entity that does just that, and the National Gallery can then participate in that network rather than to have to pilot it. All right. This is not the time or the place to go into the multitude of factors that shape art ecologies in any particular context or in the context of Jamaica. But I want to conclude this paper by presenting a brief overview, and there's some more slides, let me just leave it on this one, by presenting a brief overview of what already exists in Jamaica and what may need to be added and developed for such collaborative networks to take shape. The National Gallery is the main visual arts institution in Jamaica, and when it opened in 1974, it was a product of cultural nationalism that emerged in the pre- and post-independence period. Its exhibitions and programs had traditionally focused on defining and narrating quote-unquote Jamaican art, which was a valuable and indeed necessary project in its own right, although we have in recent years tried to open the discussion by unpacking prevailing definitions and narration of Jamaican art and culture, and by including the wider Caribbean and its diaspora in our exhibitions and audiences. I refer to my presentation at yesterday's keynote panel. The National Gallery is a government entity and operates as a semi-autonomous division of the Institute of Jamaica, which is in itself an agency of the Ministry of Culture, wherever the culture portfolio happens to be at a particular point in time. And that has ranged from anything to tourism, education, culture and youth, etc., etc. We are bound by civil service strictures in terms of operations, finance, and HR, but only about 75% of our funding comes from the government budget, and this basically covers salaries, the building and utilities, with a small provision for operations, and that basically covers our office expenses and nothing else. Our exhibitions and programs are funded off the budget from revenues, sponsorship, in-kind donations, including works of art for the collection, grant funding, and other fundraising activities such as event rental programs, which in themselves help to create collaborative networks. To provide some more context, the National Gallery has a collection of about 2,200 works of art, most of them Jamaican or related to Jamaica and dates from pre-Columbian to the contemporary. We stage about 4 exhibitions per year each at our Kingston and Montego Bay locations. We also have an active education and outreach program with children's art programs and audience development strategies, such as our free last Sundays. We collaborate frequently with other government entities, such as the Edna Manley College, which is the English-speaking Caribbean's main visual and performing arts school, and a major partner in a lot of our programs. Our Montego Bay branch is an interesting case study in itself, because this is a joint venture between ourselves and the St. James Parish Council, which is the local government entity for Montego Bay and environs, and the Tourism Enhancement Fund, which is funded by hotel taxes. As long as we stay within the regulatory framework of government and adhere to best practices for public museums, for instance by mitigating conflict of interest situations, there is room for collaborations with private entities, although we do this far less frequently than we should, and that is a mutual problem. That is not only a problem of the National Gallery not initiating, it is also a problem of private entities not initiating those collaborations either. So we sort of operate in separate worlds. I think generally speaking, those collaborations work best with non-profit entities, but there is no reason why we could also not collaborate with for-profit entities, even when the circumstances allow it. Other government entities involved in the visual arts in Jamaica are our main partner, the Edna Manley College, and to a lesser extent, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, which has responsibility for public monuments, and the Jamaica Cultural Development Commission, which organizes the annual Independence Festival, which includes an art exhibition and competition. Other Institute of Jamaica divisions, such as Liberty Hall, have small art holdings, and one, the Junior Center, has children's art programs, but none are none are specialized in that regard. One other government entity, the Bank of Jamaica, also owns a large art collection and has its own curator. And there are a few heritage sites, such as Devon House, the National Gallery's original home, that have museum functions and include art in their displays. At a private level, there are presently two non-profit artist spaces that offer residencies and programs. One is NLS, New Local Space, which was founded some years ago by Deborah Anzinger and offers residencies and exhibitions to local and international artists and organizes regular programs, although it is a small operation with a micro-gallery space, which imposes some limitations. The other is Studio 174, not far from the National Gallery in downtown Kingston, and which focuses mainly on community and art programming in the socially volatile inner city of West Kingston. There have been some collaborations between the National Gallery and both organizations, but nothing structured or sustained. There are other more informal collectives, such as Paint Jamaica, a street mural initiative that collaborates with community programs such as Life Yard on Fleet Street and other inner city areas. While we play no role in the Paint Jamaica program, which is entirely artist and community driven, we have developed a working relationship with the collective and featured the murals in our 2014 biennial catalogue as a special featured initiative. And we have also organized children's art programs with Life Yard. There are other initiatives, such as the Kingston on the Edge Festival, which actually provides a framework that we could leverage to develop what I'm heading for. But it is very loosely organized at the present time and probably needs a little bit more structure to be really viable to carry something such as the biennial. I realize that I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to summarize what else I had to say. Basically, one thing that we are also battling with in Jamaica in terms of the development of a more substantial and robust nonprofit sector is the ideas about art that prevail. And those ideas are basically, there are two major schools of thought. One is to see art as a tool for social intervention. The other is to see art as a luxury commodity. And those two exist in a very, very uneasy relationship with each other, but there is very little space for things in between or things outside of those parameters. And for instance, that has implications for our funding. I can fund a traditional exhibition quite easily with money to spare. Any children's program that I want to organize at the National Gallery, they're practically falling over me to fund it. But to fund an exhibition of contemporary art or something like the biennial, you really have to battle for that. So I think the perceptions of art play a major role. I think that one, and then the last thing I want to focus on is really policy development. Because right now in Jamaica, as has happened throughout the Caribbean, there is a strong focus on the creative industries as a means of economic development. But generally speaking, the ideas that accompany that tend to be very limited and tend to be very much focusing on products that can be made available for sale and other direct money-making activities. And there's very little sense of the broader economies that surround art and cultural institutions and art events. And just to bring it back to the Edinburgh Art Festival, when 4 million people come to your town, that has a ripple effect throughout the economy, from the hotels, the taxis, the restaurants, and so on. Everybody benefits in ways that go way beyond how the creative industries are usually understood. So all I can hope is that we can leverage all these ideas. What is also needed in Jamaica, and that's the last point I want to make, is a funding structure and a management structure that really allows for these sort of things to happen. We have the benefit of some funding agencies. The Tourism Enhancement Fund is one. The Chase Fund, which is lottery funded, is another, from which we have benefited a lot at the National Gallery. But these are not generally very supportive of private initiative. They tend to focus on public initiative rather than private initiative. So I think what is really needed is a special arts fund that is geared towards developing, providing support and management support also to private initiative. So I'll leave it here. Sorry if the end of it was a little summarized, but I think I've used up my time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Veerle. And I think there's a lot of different models there that we can look to explore further, both in our own countries and, as you touched on, really looking at the wider region and bundling in the region, even online, would be another great idea. So how can we actually take the conversation even outside our own communities and really start having this regional conversation? Do I have questions?
Thanks for that presentation. That's kind of where my mind lies, all those partnerships and collaborations and making them happen because government doesn't see it and private doesn't see it. My question is, do you think that kind of officially training and having partnership brokers for the arts and culture space might help? People who can speak both sides of the language kind of.
Well, I think one area of focus in terms of the human resource development has been on the technical and scholarly side. But I think what is really badly needed is also people who can do the policy advocacy, right? Because that is the foundation of getting those other things done at the end of the day. And I think that is missing at the present time in the Caribbean. And if it is there, it tends to focus on, not on the visual arts, let me put it that way. It tends to focus on the performing arts, and that has been a major problem that especially advocacy that I think the visual arts situation needs is just not there.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, if we could put our hands together for Dr. Cooper. Thank you very much, Veerle. It was great.